The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, and welcome to today's webinar, Remote Work Policies and Considerations, presented by our sponsor, Heffernan. We're so happy you can join us. My name is Deb Beto, and I will be your moderator today and be monitoring questions you may have during the session. Before we open up the session, let's review a couple of key items. All of the webinar materials we discuss can be found at the URL currently showing on your screen. I will be sharing this URL in a follow-up email, so don't feel like you need to write it down right now. If you have trouble with your internet connection during the webinar, we recommend leaving the presentation and logging back in. If you have audio difficulties or a telephone line goes dead during the call, hang up and call back again to the same number. If all lines go dead, watch the on-screen chat box for an alternative call-in number. Please feel free to ask questions or provide feedback by using the chat box or questions box during the webinar. If you are using a tablet, you may need to tap on the screen for the options bar to appear, and then you can select the appropriate option. We may not respond immediately, but we will work your questions or feedback into the presentation. If we can't get to your comment or question during the session, we will be online afterwards to respond, or we may follow up in an email if we run completely out of time. You may also email us at moderator@aspenrmg.com for up to 48 hours after the webinar. This will be a 1-hour presentation. Questions and comments are very much encouraged throughout, and the presenter will be answering questions during the session and at the end. And lastly, we have a number of webinars upcoming covering a variety of topics, including those listed at the Heffernan webinar website. In addition, we offer the mandatory Preventing Harassment training in English 3 times a year. With that, let's begin today's webinar, Remote Work Policies and Considerations. Our presenter today is CJ Westrick. CJ Westrick is an SPHR and has been in human resources management for over 25 years and received her senior professional in human resources national certification in 2002. She started HR Jungle in 2006 and targets companies that want senior level HR expertise on a part-time basis. HR Jungle provides business owners and management teams workable solutions and hands-on assistance with employees and legal compliance through outsourced HR services. Welcome, CJ.
Thank you, Deb. And can you guys see my screen okay? I'll assume that's
yes, we can. Yes, we can.
All right. Today, we're obviously talking about remote work, and I want to go a little into what it looked like before, what it looks like now, different policy considerations, HR issues, and a few tips for success. So we're going to just start right off with our first polling question.
Excellent. So let me get that going here. Oh my goodness, I thought I had it all propped, ready to go. Okay. Here we go. What percentage of employees will you keep working remotely after COVID? None, up to 25%, up to 50%, up to 75%, or all of our employees? So if you are using a tablet, you may need to tap on the screen to see your options, and then you can select the appropriate option. Otherwise, I'd like to wait until we have at least about 75–80% of the people that have voted, just to make sure that everybody has a chance to participate. So if you haven't voted yet, make sure you do, because that's what's holding up the session from continuing. Okay, so we have 17% say none, 29% say up to 25%, 21% say up to 50%, 22% say up to 75%, and 10% say all of our employees.
See, now those numbers have changed a lot over time, and some of that is because we kind of got forced into the remote. But let's look what seems like a long time ago into 2019. At that time, surveys were showing that 85% of companies confirmed that flexibility increased productivity. And 77 believed it could, lead to lower operating costs. And others, had that they felt that the remote work and the flexibility of the remote work was a really great non-monetary way to retain employees. And some even believed the reduced space needs would lower their costs. From the employee side, 80% in 2019 said they turned down a job that didn't offer flexible working. And 75% of the current teleworkers said that they plan to work remotely for the rest of their career. 57% more, that are more likely to be satisfied with their job. 56% said there were reduced absences, and 30% said they'd prioritize remote working over a title or a better position. And because they liked the work from home. And in 2019, I would say, and even before 2019, that seemed to be a lot of the case, is that employees really craved working from home. They saw it as a status symbol and stuff like that. They liked some of the things. And I will say that a lot of remote worker employers weren't looking that hard at what it was, because a lot of times it was a little higher level people, stuff like that. And then we hit last year where it was what I call the Band-Aid method of remote work. Every company out there was trying to figure out how to stay in business, how to get something done when they couldn't come into the office, because I know the environment, depending on your type of business, it's like, you might have opened and closed and opened and closed, and it was really hard on businesses. So I saw a lot of new revenue streams coming into play. I saw a lot of people getting pushed into remote work. I had one client who was actually delivering little computer stands to their employees so they could work from home and things like that. So it was really a Band-Aid remote work situation for 2020. But as we're moving into, and have started 2021, we need to look beyond the Band-Aid method, because now it's looking more long-term. Even if, because look at the numbers you guys put up on the polls there. There's 20% in almost every category of what you plan to do. And I will guess that a lot of those are higher numbers than you would have answered for in 2019 if you'd been asked that same question. And that's what I'm seeing. I've got a couple of clients that are gone completely remote. I've got others that are looking at it. I've got some that have realized that productivity has gone down and they can't wait to get their employees back in the office. So let's take a look at a few other things. And I'm going to, I think, polling question first. I've only got 3 of these, so I'm trying to space it out a little bit.
They're so helpful in understanding where everybody is at right now. So here's our next polling question. Do you have a policy specifically about working remotely? No, you're working on it. Yes, but it needs more detail. Or yes, and it's very detailed. And just as a reminder, we will be sending out an email with information for how to access all of the webinar materials, including the PowerPoint presentation. So we'll be sending that out after the session today. All right. So right now we have 33% say no, 24% say working on it, 28% say yes, but it needs more detail, and 15% say yes, and it's very detailed.
And that's exactly what I was talking about. You've got a lot of you out there who don't have a policy or have started one, but it's not really out there yet. And that's going to be a problem going forward. And so we're going to talk a little bit about, what kind of things you have to think about that go into a policy and such. So let's talk about the workspace. In the past, I'd see companies allowing people to go work from home and didn't really think much to ask, many questions about exactly what does your home workspace look like. And, and so if you look at some people that have often been remote, you've got some sales reps or this or that, or higher level people, and they actually had a home office. But one of the questions you need to start asking is, do you have a space that's quiet and distraction free? I'm hearing about some employees that want to work from home because, gosh, now I don't have to worry about childcare so much because I can do it. Or I can, take care of things at home. I had one where it's like they're having their home remodeled, and that's why they wanted to work from home. But, you need to also get the work done. And it's important that they take it seriously if they're going to work from home. So they need to be able to dedicate their full attention. You don't want to hear about the pets that just walked across the keyboard. You don't want to hear the kids banging at the door to get in to talk with the parent. Because if you've got kids, if they know you're home, they will not leave you alone. And, so this is not, something. And I've got, I had one client before all this started that actually would require the employee to provide a photograph of what their home office looked like. Is it something where it is set up, ergonomically? Do they actually have a space? If you got paper, because I know we've tried to go digital, but paper is still unavoidable in many cases, is that being secure? And, are you sure that that employee is going to be available? The thing I hear a lot from clients is they're supposed to be working. We tried calling, we tried texting, we've emailed, and they're not responding. So that tells me that the employee is not taking their work schedule very seriously. But that kind of goes back to, are they moving into a little office space where they feel like they're at work? And what does that look like? Communication has always in the past been the biggest problem. And one of the reasons why clients will bring people back into the office is because they find that the communication is lacking. There's everything from the paper, again, I mentioned, we get mail, we get things like that. Somehow that paper needs to keep moving. I've got one client where they have a receptionist who, she's like the only person in the office, and she scans every document and then sends it out digitally, by email or whatever, to the employees that need to work on it. But you need a process for doing stuff like that. And, are you investing in, the software needed to be able to communicate? There's a lot of different things out there. I mean, I've got one client who uses email as their primary communication, and I am involved in those emails, and I swear I get like 50 emails a day just from that client, and most of them could be condensed, to where there are only like 3 topics. It's just that they've got that much back and forth over the one topic. And that's their primary thing. But I don't necessarily, my experience with them makes me realize email is not the primary communication tool for a company, or shouldn't be, because you can lose track of, if you've got clients using that same email, you can lose track of what's coming in from clients when you've got all that back and forth amongst the employees emailing. But there are, there's chat kind of apps out there. There's things like that that can be used. And, and be training. It's like not everybody knows how to use different apps and software and stuff. And so you really need to make sure the employees know it, because that's going to also change not only how much they communicate, if they're uncomfortable using the tool, but, where other things go on. It's like then they're not doing their thing, or it's taking them a lot longer to communicate in the ways that you've provided because they're not trained on it. So now productivity has gone down again. And one of the biggest things you've got, and you've probably noticed it in the past year, is the isolation. I've worked with extroverts who were renting. I was with one company where we were renting a spare office out to this person who was an extrovert. And I tell you, she could not be in that office for more than 2 hours by herself before she had to come out and interact with the people outside of her office. And then she'd go back and work some more, and then stuff like that. But, people don't always do well on their own. There's, that's why there's a lot of those shared workspaces out there, is because those, entrepreneurs and things like that didn't like always being alone in their office. And, I actually have a weekly Zoom meeting with my employees, and, and we can talk face to face, stuff like that. But one of the things that I've always talked with employees about, when I've helped downsize a company and the employee kind of hangs on to the job as long as they possibly can, even though they know the company's perhaps going down the tubes. And when I've asked them why they're still there, they said, because I really like who I work with. There's a team here. We get along great, stuff like that. And so I'll stay as long as I can stick around these people until I have to move on. But you might find some of that loyalty is gone when they don't have those relationships anymore. I just talked with a client a couple of weeks ago that said they had organized like the picnic. You know how you have to, sometimes the companies will do the summer picnic for the company, but they set it up specifically so that everybody had their own little table, like over 6 feet apart. They could still talk. They just had to talk loudly. It was out in the park, but they went through a lot of work to make the employees be able to still see each other and be around and just talk, that, you know, so they could hold on to some of that. And you need to consider that, because using a tool like a chat tool or something like that, or email, it doesn't lend itself toward those relationships as much as just getting some work done. And so you really have to kind of consider how else we can do something to build the team and keeping them feeling like they're part of a team. And because a lot of people just need the people around them to do that. And one of my rules has always been in HR is like, when the person, you know, with the job just sees it as a job anymore, and they're not involved with the company and the employees, it's easier to lose them to another job somewhere else, because now that loyalty isn't there, because there's nothing holding them in place anymore. So you really have to give some thought to how you're going to get that communication going. And it lends, you know, even for managers to be able to know what's going on. There's a lot of communication that needs to go on. And so part of that is the protocols. What are you expecting from people? What are you doing to help them make that communication easier and more ongoing and consistent, as if they were in the office? Because, you know, if you're in an office environment, and a lot of times you have cubes and stuff like that, you know, in the cubes, people talk from their cube to each other. If you've got offices, I don't know how much business I've seen done, even with the executives, walking by another exec's office and stopping and saying, you know, I had this idea about something. I have found that they're less likely to make comments like that and to have those communications when they're not physically somewhat near each other. So it's something to think about. Security is huge. There was a study done, and they have found that personal computers, so even if it's, let's just say from homes, not just personal computers, because you might give them a laptop. So, but anyhow, the fact that they're using their own internet, stuff like that, makes them 40% less secure than when they're in the office. So you've got you know, so that's something that the company needs to consider, is how are they going to keep those computers, their files, everything secure? It's not just, oh, well, we put everything in the cloud so it's secure there with passwords. It's like not true. It's like it had to go from your employee's home internet through the ether to end up over in that cloud somewhere where it's being stored. That means there's a lot of potential security breaches there. I've got a couple of clients that have set up those VPNs, which I don't even know how they work, but, you know, they're, you know, doing that to help protect their standards. You know, you've got people that leave their computers unattended in their home. Oh, it's my home. I don't have anything. And then I hear, oh, well, you know, my cat walked across the keyboard while I was using the bathroom, and, you know, and completely messed something up. And, you know, you've got different things like that. I mean, with security, I've got in my policies to where if you're going to get up from the desk and leave that space where you've got your workspace, you log off. Yes, it's a pain, but they shouldn't have to get up that much, no more than they would if they were, actually probably less so than if they were in the office, because they're not going and talking to other people so much. But, you know, when you're at home particularly, you get distracted. Oh, let me go throw that load of laundry in because I'm home, you know, and do that. And next thing you know, that computer's been sitting there unattended for an hour, and, you know, or longer. You know, and then again, everybody thinks that their home is really secure. But if you have people over, and this is more, consider, you know, once we're out of the COVID scare of having people over to our house, people come over, you forget, you leave your computer on. It doesn't mean when someone goes to the restroom, they don't, oh, look, there's the office. Wow, look at the computer, blah, blah, blah. You might have confidential information on there. You need rules about whether, you know, they've gotten bored at home and now they're going to go over to the coffee shop, and just so they can be around people. or that shared workspace. And that's where they're more comfortable because they like having a little noise around them and some people that they can see even if they're not talking with them. Again, using that public hotspot is extremely dangerous for your security. And, so you need to look at that. I've got one employee who actually saves stuff initially to her hard drive and then puts it into the cloud. And I have been pushing hard to not have that happen because I don't, my own laptop, I keep nothing on it in the hard drive, or stuff that nothing business that's important. I mean, I might keep some old stuff in there that I just haven't moved out or gotten deleted, but I keep everything in the cloud and I work on it while it's in the cloud. And, because you can set up everything from Dropbox to SharePoint or Dropbox to SharePoint and all those other things to where they can work faster from your computer without saving it to your hard drive. And, it kind of has this weird way. I'm not going to get into the tech of it, but you need to make sure, I know I have a client that I started working with years ago that was always techie. I mean, that's what they are as a tech company. And initially their policies had, here's exactly how you back up on a daily basis to the cloud every single day. And here's the protections we take and blah, 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 and things like that. We always have rules in our handbooks that talk about, no, you're not supposed to download anything on your computer at work. But when it's at home, they kind of lose track of the fact that this is a work computer. And so you need to kind of make sure they understand that, or you've got methods set up to where they can't download, directly, that it needs to come from your company and, IT company or something like that. So you want to kind of look at some of those things because it all plays into the security for the company itself and, what is going on there. Because I've even had, I don't know how many of you have ever had a termination where, you're letting go of someone and they're like, oh, but I have all this personal stuff on my computer. And it's at work, and it's like, why in the world do they even do that? But they do. And so imagine when it's sitting at home, how much stuff they're going to keep on there. Oh, look, my company gave me a faster, better computer. I'll just use this all the time instead of my old one. And next thing you know, your company computer is, with all that personal stuff in there, where they're putting downloads on there, where they're saving files perhaps they shouldn't, things like that. They're clicking links in emails on that computer that they shouldn't be doing, because that phishing thing that they do with the emails now is huge. And so there's a lot of things to consider in the security. And you should be talking with your IT people when you come up with that part of a policy. Then there's the basic safety. You do realize that when someone has a home office, you're still subject to what that safety is as far as free from hazards, like they're running an extension cord across the floor, they trip on their kid's toy in their little office space, and you have a workers' comp issue. Is it ergonomic? I have found most of them are not ergonomic. They're working on their kitchen table, which is not at the right height to be ergonomic. They're working with a laptop in their lap on their sofa. They're, doing something where this is not an ergonomic setup. And it's fine when it's a little temporary thing, but that's not fine when you're talking a more permanent workspace. It needs to be ergonomic. Their keyboard needs to be at the right height. They need to have a proper chair, all that kind of stuff to consider. And that's why I had that client that was have them, if you're wanting to work remote, I need to see a picture of your home office. Let me see that you've got that kind of stuff in place, because a lot of companies aren't providing the furniture. They're assuming the employee has it if they're wanting to work remotely. But these days, and particularly in this last year, that's not been happening. Just like I mentioned, I have a client who was running around, the county, dropping off work tables so these people could put their laptop that they'd gotten from the company on something that was the right height. And but don't think because they're working from home that you are relieved of those duties for their safety. The bad chair that you get a workers' comp complaint at work, which I've had before, even though the guy bought the chair when we were selling off office equipment, still filed a claim that it wasn't an ergonomic chair for him because he was a really tall person. And, that kind of thing. Well, think about, all the home stuff I've seen, because I've seen, managers that are working from their kitchen table, and that's not ergonomic. I've tried it. Your shoulders tense up after about an hour of that, which is why a lot of times even the coffee shops aren't great workplaces for ergonomic purposes. So you need to really consider, what are you asking of these people, or what are you allowing them to do that they shouldn't be doing, that you wouldn't allow in your offices? And then compliance. This is a really big one. Again, we go back to, what kind of software do you have? How are you knowing that they're clocking in and out when they should? A lot of companies, even if you've got people who are exempt and salaried out there that don't need to clock in, they still need to manage their time because it's maybe getting charged against a client or project or something like that. But for the hourly people that are out there, how are you, what kind of system? Is it like where they can go in and just go into their office and go online and click into, the payroll company and say, okay, I've started working, but then there's nothing that says that they stayed on their computer and did anything. I do have some clients that can show the actual workflow going on. And, I've been working with them because they're putting someone on probation because there's like 2 and 3 hour gaps where they can show that nothing is happening from that computer, from that employee's computer, and the type of work they're doing absolutely should be on the computer. So how are you tracking that? If you're in a location where there's required, meal breaks, where there's overtime, every state's got overtime. And some, like California, it's daily, but even the feds, it's a weekly thing. How are you tracking that kind of stuff? And, and how are you making sure that it's actually true? And you've got leave of absence. Just because they're working from home doesn't mean they don't qualify for leaves of absence. And the biggie for me is because, like, California just changed their version of the FMLA. CFRA is California Family Rights Act. So they just brought that from 50 plus employees down to 5 plus. So it's going to hit almost every single company out there. So the big question is, whereas in the office environment, and you had 50 or more employees, you had people a lot of times that would help cover for that time off. Because not every position you can just bring a temp in and say, let's sit at the front desk and answer the phones and we're good. So when now they're working remote, how are you providing or dealing with the coverage you might leave for leave of absence? Did you even think about it? And I've also seen in this last year, a lot of home workers have moved. Especially because of COVID, they've moved in with their family in another state. They've moved in, with they've moved around. I get one client where I just found out this employee moved to Switzerland. How do we deal with that? So what are you doing about those things? How are you setting up? Are you notifying your payroll? I have an employee in another state now, so we need to change the taxes for that person because their location just changed. You need to let your workers' comp carrier know that it's a home office. I know when I was working, I know people that own temporary staffing agencies, and some of them have workers' comp policies that will not allow one of their temps to work from home for a company. It has to be in a commercial building. And then you've got your health insurance. If you're providing health insurance, when I worked inside, we had a nationwide sales force, and I would realize that, okay, our location, we've got a great HMO, but gosh, this person who's out in Rhode Island, there are no HMOs, or in these other states. And so we had to have PPO policies set up for them and, make it available to them. But as people are moving around as a remote worker, they're not realizing that every time they change locations, and it may even be just from one city to another, still in the same state, it could change how you have to deal with that employee. The employment laws move with the employee. So if you've got an employee in, say, San Diego, there, in California alone, there's over 30 localities with different laws about their paid sick leave. And there's a lot of other states or cities with different paid sick leave laws. So that's a good one to kind of even look at, is to realize it's like, oh gosh, this person moved from Carlsbad, which is in the same county as San Diego. But in Carlsbad, they only needed 24 hours of sick leave a year. But as soon as they moved into the city of San Diego, they needed 40 sick hours per year. You need to look at that kind of stuff because it's where the employee is living and working will tell you which laws you're going to have to follow. And for those that have moved out of state, you need those employment law posters, or at least the information that comes on them, because the federal rules change, the, state rules change, and your handbook may have to now include different states on how you're doing things. Look at pregnancy leave. A lot of states offer nothing for pregnancy leave. Some states offer 6 weeks. California offers, if it's true disability, up to 4 months. And so I've got clients with employees in different states, and we have to break out, okay, what's our policy for that state if we don't want to do the same policy for everybody? And, and again, you've got the posters. How are you making sure the employees are seeing the posters that they are required by law to have, easy access to? And, so it's all those kind of things to realize, what are you doing for that? And to take a look at it to make sure that you've got your bases covered, because it's very easy to have someone move who doesn't even think about telling you. And something happens and, oh, no, that's my old address. I'm over here. And you're like, oh, I've had people change states without telling. And as I mentioned, I have I've had more than one client whose employee suddenly moved to another country without mentioning it. And, and it potentially creates a lot of issues. And so you need to kind of figure out how you're dealing with that. But there's some of the simpler stuff, even if they're staying in the same basic location, they're no longer coming into your office, so they don't see that employment wall poster anymore. They, aren't, someone where you can have someone fill in for them easily if they have a leave. And there's a lot more leaves available now than, ever before. And I see that going to be changing more and more as time goes on, even on the federal side. So these are your compliance things. And don't forget minimum wage and minimum salary requirements. Somebody changes location, it could change what you're paying for wages or for a minimum salary. The feds have been trying for a very long time to increase the minimum salary for those exempt positions. They tried a few years ago to bring it up to I think it was $47,476, something like that. It was a weird number. But the South, who only previously had a minimum or a minimum salary of $21,000, went through the roof over that and said, no, that's over twice what we currently have to pay a salaried employee. And so it got shot down, but the feds have not stopped trying. They're going to keep pushing until that number gets moved up, because they want to show that an exempt position needs to be, we'll call it a higher level position with a lot more authority than it's been getting for several years. So they're pushing it up and up. But, there are states that have it, like California. We never really worried about what the feds wanted for a minimum salary, because we had our own, because the rule is always it's got to be 2 times minimum wage. If you're in a state where you're only using the federal minimum wage, it's an easy number to hit for most companies. In California, our minimum wage is going up all the time. And right now, the minimum is $54,000 for an exempt person. And so having the feds go to 40-something is doesn't matter, because we're already above that. So you want to kind of look at all those different things and how that affects you. And, with moving around, because there's a lot of local laws in addition to the state laws. So that movement of your workers could make a difference on how you have to deal with your compliance. All right. Our last polling question.
All right, and we have had quite a few questions come in, so we'll get to a few of them before we finish this polling question, and then we'll get to the rest after the session today. So which of the following do you provide to remote workers? Does your company select all of them that apply? Do you provide computers, webcams, cell phones or desk phones, and a headset? Internet service, or all of the above and more? And I'll just tell you, this software only let us put 5 answers down. We had 10 that we wanted to put down. So it's not an all-inclusive list. So CJ, from a time clock standpoint, remote time clocks are a whole other subject. But when it comes to non-exempt employees, if you notice a non-exempt employee who has 1 hour here, then 2 hours off, and then 3 hours there, and then an hour off, and then another 2 hours. They don't work more than 8 hours in a day, but their schedule is wonky. Is that something that a company should allow?
I
How's
wouldn't,
that working
because
out?
it depends on where you're located. In California, you may have this split shift pay calculation you have to do for those gaps. And but I think the biggest thing is you need, even offering some flexibility. It's not meant to be like that. It's meant to say, okay, you can start your workday at 8 or 9, but then you need to work here for 8 hours, mostly because your managers, everybody needs to know that they can contact this person during the business hours. It doesn't matter. And frankly, too, the person who's doing that breaking it apart thing is going to burn themselves out, because it's going to feel like they never stop working. Yes, they're only working 8 hours, but they've stretched it over a 12 or 13-hour period to where it feels like they've never stopped and had then their home time. But as a company, I think you want to, especially for the non-exempts, you want to designate what is their schedule, and that's exactly when you expect to be able to reach them and communicate with them. Because there are states like, there is this thing of the off the clock. So let's say one of their manager tries to reach them during that 2 hours they're not working, and they pick up the email. Well, now you've maybe just gone into overtime because you have to pay for that time. And, because the manager doesn't realize that they've got this wonky schedule. So I think it's really important that you designate, and make your flexibility something other than just stretch it out as long as you get 8 hours in. It's going to come back and bite you somehow.
Okay. And if you're working in an office with others, are you required to wear a mask?
My general rule, and this is got to be a company policy decision, but my general rule is, if you're at your workstation and your workstation's, you're like 6 feet apart from other people, you don't have to wear it while you're like facing your computer doing your work. But the moment you get out of your chair, the mask goes on.
Okay. So we'll get to the other questions after the session today, if everybody can hang on that long. So in our poll, we have 81% say computers, 43% provide webcams, 42% provide cell or desk phone and headset, 16% provide internet service, and 15% are all of the above and more.
Whoa. Okay. Some of you have a lot of work to do. So let's talk about that office setup. The computer is a no-brainer. Everyone should absolutely provide a computer for that person, because that's where your security comes into play. Your IT people or whoever sets up your laptops with they're going to put the programs on there. They're going to put the security on there they need, stuff like that. If you're allowing the person to use their home computer, you're telling the world that you're okay with just making all your files public, because you can't go into that person's personal computer and remove anything, even your own company files. And you can't track what that person's doing on their personal computer like you could on a company computer. Webcam. Without a webcam, you have no face-to-face interactions for your employees anymore. They're just talking to voices or looking and reading emails and stuff. And that's going to come back to damage that loyalty, that relationship they've got with their coworkers, with their managers, things like that. You really need, and it can be, I've talked to a lot of foreheads where they've had their camera on the laptop they're using, has the camera in the hinge instead of up above. And so, it's like, but at least they can adjust it a little bit to try and get a face-to-face or an eyeball-to-eyeball, if nothing else. External monitors, or maybe it depends on the work. If they were in the office and they'd have a secondary monitor, you want to provide that for their home, because you don't want them to have to not be able to do the same productivity, the same type of thing as they were in the office. This is what you're trying to duplicate in that home office, is the same work environment. And, like I have a second monitor, and I actually have a little computer I use like when I'm traveling or, things like that. And I have learned even, my regular laptop, it is really hard for me now to do things using just the one monitor on the laptop instead of having my secondary. So it kind of depends. Printer and scanner is optional, depends on what you do. You know, if they never have paper to deal with paper whatsoever, great, you don't need it. Internet service speed. A lot of people have the internet, but is it fast enough? Because not everybody buys the high-speed version that you may want, again, for productivity. How many times have you seen, if you've ever done like GoToMeeting or Zoom meetings, and they're like, internet, you know, stability, you know, issue coming up, and the picture goes off or something like that? Because the internet is like crazy busy these days because of COVID, and you need to make sure that your employees have a high-speed internet service so they can actually do the work, so that their work can be saved into the cloud. Furniture is the one where most companies will back away from. It's like, no, if they want to work remotely, I expect them to have some kind of an office setup. But did you hear me say that? If they want to work remotely. Are you giving them a choice? If you're saying this position is now remote, you may be the one needing to make sure they've got the right furniture for it. And just like my client that ran around and you know, for COVID purposes, sent out, you know, little desktops they could use their laptop on. Cell, desk phone, headset. This is another issue, and I'll get into the detail of that in a moment here. Office supplies, it's like maybe there's no actual office supplies they need, but a lot of people may need a calculator. And yes, you can do that on, you know, there's a app on everybody's computer for a calculator. You can do that, so you don't need that. But, you know, there's other things. It depends on what their job is, on whether or not they're going to have to send out some mail, or if they need just a pencil and a pad of paper to do their job. You know, if it's something that you would have provided in the office, consider providing it for that remote worker. This is that virtual private network, which I'm clueless on how it all works. But like I said, some companies are, you know, doing that to ensure their security. And one question that has been starting to pop up is, wow, are you going to pay me part of my, you know, reimburse me for part of my rent? Because now I'm using part of my apartment or home for you. So that rent, and don't think this is unreasonable. IRS would say absolutely. Because if you're, you know, I write off my office space on my taxes because it's used for my work only. And so that's not an unreasonable question. And so that kind of goes back to these other items then, the computer, the printer, the internet, the cell phone. IRS and certain states, California being one, believes very, very much so that it should never cost the employee 1 penny to work for you. And California has taken it to the point where in court, the judges actually said, even if it's not costing them because they already have it, the company is receiving a benefit by the employee allowing the company to use their personal equipment. So the company should still reimburse that employee for the company's use of their equipment. And they're very serious about that. You know, if you've got an employee with a cell phone unlimited plan, there was a court case specifically about that. Said, well, then if they're using that 50% of the time for your stuff, you should be paying 50% of their bill and giving them that reimbursement. So California has taken this on, but IRS also believes it. And so the employee has resources they can use against you to say, hey, it's costing me money. And frankly, a long time ago, there were even cases of like the delivery people. I think it was Domino's that got a lawsuit a long time ago because their delivery people were paid minimum wage and they were only paid like a flat amount per delivery. And some enterprising delivery guy started tracking his mileage and came up with the fact that when I pay for my mileage and even with that little flat fee you give me for that and my minimum wage, I'm actually making below minimum wage. And Domino's got hit hard for their drivers not making minimum wage. So, you know, when you look at what it's costing somebody to provide all the stuff to do your work, give it some thought. Are you actually asking them to lose money to work for you? It's a big thing these days, and it's going to get more so. Performance expectations, they should be the same as your facility. So that kind of goes back to those hours of work. You know, you wouldn't expect somebody to come and go out of your office. So why are you letting them come and go out of their home when you're expecting them to work? Then you've got meeting protocols. If you have people that either, whether it's a team meeting with each other, stuff like that, and you've got cameras, ideally you don't want to have somebody come up, because remember, this is work. You want them to look as professional as they would have looked in your office. Now, it only needs to be above the waist because that's all you're ever going to see for the most part. But at least that. I've got clients where if you're going to do an in-person meeting, with a client, then it has to be in our facility. You can't do it in some odd location unless it's in a pre-approved location and something like that. But you also need to make sure your managers get special training on how to manage and retain remote workers. It is not the same as when they were in the office where they could see that person working, or they could see that person sitting there just chatting away with their coworkers instead of getting work done. I've had clients long before COVID who would send me these like long chat screens because it was the company's chat software, and they're going, these people are talking, and they're actually talking badly about other employees who could actually see this, and blah blah blah. They're doing all this stuff that's wrong, and stuff like that. So you need rules, and you need to know what a manager, because a manager needs to have special ways that he can track what's going on with his employees, and you need protocols set up for those managers. Are you expecting them to only kind of keep a virtual eye on them? Are they actually scheduling face-to-face, remote meetings as far as like using Zoom or GoToWebinar or something like that? Are they doing something so that team feels like a team and that they actually are getting the work done like expected? And it's not easy. And I've seen a lot of issues with that come up before. So you need to kind of think through, it's like, how are you making sure that the performance is still there for everybody, both the manager. I've had managers that got recalled to the office because they just weren't communicating enough with their employees, and their employees were actually in the office. And the managers wanted to work remotely, and it's like, nope, we've tried it for 6 months. It's not working at all. Your employees are asking other people how to do stuff or what they should be doing because they can't get a hold of you. So, that requires some thought. Eligibility. I think this is a biggie, especially going forward. Right now, like I said, it's because of COVID, but what happens when COVID is not the issue anymore? I like to see a minimum length of employment so you actually know what kind of level of performance you're going to get out of that person and what you can expect once they go remote. How are they performing? What is their role? What is that home office situation? You should have an approval process and even a trial period. We will try this for a month or 3 months. And at that time, then we'll make a decision on it continuing. And you absolutely need something in writing that says the company has the right to pull back that remote work and bring it into the office at any time for any reason with minimal notice, because it's huge. That's all I can say is it's a huge thing. That employees, once they get out there, they tend not to want to come back in the office because they've got something going on. I've seen people that were able to do it for a little while, and then when the company came in, it's like, oh, well, I don't have a car anymore, or oh, but now I have to find childcare for my kids. And it's like, well, the childcare should have been taken care of all along. It wasn't part of the deal of working from home. And the transportation was just part of me. I was hiring you in the initial, it's like, because it was hired as an in-office position that we allowed to go remote, but now we're pulling it back. Transportation isn't our issue, isn't our problem. So give that some thought as to how you're putting those pieces together on a longer term basis. What is that going to look like to make someone eligible? Because it's not just a matter of them asking for it or thinking they should be able to do it. You need to control it. And a policy. You should have this in your employee handbook, or at least as a separate, document employees sign. Make sure it avoids discrimination, and that's where the eligibility comes in, to where you're making sure your policy says that we can pull you back if we find your performance lacking, stuff like that. And a policy really makes the company think through the process and the what ifs, what if this and that. And I will tell you, everything I've just talked about is in my policies. My policy takes up like 4 pages in my handbooks because it is detailed. We want not only the company, but we want the employee to understand we have looked and considered all of these things. And here's exactly, where we may have a list of like, here's the stuff you may be able to get from us for, you know, the remote work, like the equipment and stuff like that. But that's decided on a case by case basis. Maybe they've got, you know, a great cell phone and you're willing to pay a reimbursement for using that. So, you know, you're not going to provide the cell phone, but you need to look at all of those things and create a policy that forces that really kind of looks through. My previous policy, I'll admit, was like 3 paragraphs long. And I didn't even really revise it during 2020. I did toward the last quarter because I knew now once we get past this emergency state of remote work, then companies really need to think it through and develop a policy that will be compliant and manage the company to continue to work really well with remote employees instead of this Band-Aid method that's been going on. And so you really need to look at that. So my tips are to make sure the company's willing and able to invest in the right technology, because the remote work is all depending on the technology. What have you got in place? It's not so simple. I've got remote access into into 2 of my clients. And, you know, they've got 8 licenses. And so any of us people like into the payroll system, they've got 8 licenses for that. And so there's times where I can't get in to do something in the payroll system that I meant to do. And I have to wait and come back later. And they actually had to increase the number of licenses because it was bumping everybody off too much, or people would forget to log off and it was still sitting there using up one of those licenses. So look at that kind of stuff. Make sure you truly have to look at that management training, because it does change things. There's articles out there you can find on how to manage remote people. I would say start looking at some of that and thinking through what are the problems. If you've been doing some remote for the past year, particularly, look and see where were those problem areas. What can we do to get past those going forward? The policy development is crucial, because it's really going to help you not be discriminatory, but it's also going to say, oh, here's our policy. Here's what we're doing to make sure, we've got all the boxes checked for eligibility, and things like that. And you need to be able to track and measure results. Like the client I told you that's got some kind of software that shows when someone's going into the system and actively using it, so they can see this person's actually really working. I've seen somewhere just as well, when I ask them questions, it's like, well, is there other work they're doing that doesn't take them actually working on the computer? It's like, well, some, but not that much. And, and they're starting to think based on what's getting done or what isn't getting done, that they're just signing in and then walking away from their computer and not doing anything. I mean, remote work is almost entirely depending on the position being run through a computer. So, there's a lot of positions that this will never work for. A lot of people have field positions where they might have an iPad for something on a job site, but they're not doing the whole job by computer. So you need a way to kind of figure out what's working. How are you measuring those results? If you're telling somebody, I'm going to put you on probation because you're not doing things as well, what do you have for backup on that? Nothing. How are you, talking about, well, it just seems like you're slower than usual. When you were in the office, it's like, well, there's a lot of things that might be causing it. How are you figuring out what that is so you can fix it? And as I mentioned before, be absolutely prepared for resistance from remote workers when they are needed back in the office. Try and give them some advance notice so they can take care of all those little things like childcare, transportation, whatever, to give them a heads up to, okay, I had a couple of clients that, okay, things have changed enough to where we really need these positions back in the office on, this date. And they tried to give them like a full month notice. And, and it was kind of like, you want the right to say, no, it's like the remote is just not working for us for whatever reason, whether it's that particular worker, whether it's the job they're doing as far as the kind of position they have that isn't really what we've discovered is it just doesn't fit the remote work environment very well for us as a company. And so we're bringing it back in the office. You need to be able to make sure employees truly understand that concept, that this is never going to be a guaranteed remote position. We will reevaluate periodically to make sure it's still working from both sides. Okay, so I've got some time left here. That was kind of the end of my little lecture.
Okay, we
And
have a
let's
lot
look at
of
the other
questions.
questions.
We have a lot of questions. So, is it okay to ask employees to take a picture of their home office? Just some clarification. You touched on that, but I don't think it was really specified whether.
Absolutely. That's going to be their new workspace. Why wouldn't you want to see what it looks like?
Okay.
You know, if they don't want to give you a picture, then just say, we're going to assume then that you don't have a proper work site and you can't do remote.
Okay. And how do you recommend we deal with posters if we're not 100% remote?
I have learned, because I have a lot of clients who aren't, that
I'm
have
sorry,
field employees.
are 100% remote. I'm sorry to interrupt.
Okay. Yeah. So I've had to deal with this for years with clients that have a lot of field employees who never come into the office to see the poster. If you look hard enough, you will find every one of those items on a poster is out there somewhere in the government sections as a PDF. You just put them all together, like the one for California is like 30 some pages of PDFs when I'm all done with it. But then I put it in a location where there's a shared drive, or I'll zip it, and send it out to each employee, or you put it as an addendum to their employee handbook. But there are ways to do it without, or you just order them a poster and send each person a poster.
Yep. Okay. So what's the difference between outsourcing staff and remote workers?
Outsourcing staff typically means you're using like temp workers, or you're using independent contractors, or you've hired, someone else. That's what outsource typically means. You're not hiring those people. Remote workers, in the way we've been talking about it, are your W-2 employees.
Okay. How do we make sure employees create ergonomic stations for themselves? Do we have them sign something?
That goes back to that picture, and you can make some requirements. It's like, I need to see that that you've got a decent office chair and a desk, and even a desk in itself is not really what you're looking for. You're looking for something at the right computer height, which is technically 2 inches shorter than a desk. So are you having to provide them with a computer, like a keyboard drawer, or something like that? And that's where I would say, you have them, write down, rather than you give them the idea where they're just signing off on something and lying about it. It's like, I need you to list what you're using, what you have in your home office, that makes sure that it's ergonomic.
Okay.
And have them sign it. And then it doesn't meet your eligibility requirements.
Okay. So is it correct to pay employees for the use of their office space if they're also deducting the space on their tax return? Do we give them that choice, or how does that work?
You don't have an option on that. It's like if you were in California, they would just say, hey, there's no reason you shouldn't be paying because the employee has just lost this chunk of their personal space. So I think whether or not they claim it on tax is going to be up to them, but it's going to, not much you can do with that, because you never know how an employee files their taxes. And I will say IRS has made it harder for those personal deductions for employees, because it used to be, oh, well, if they've got business miles or they've got this or that, they can take it off of, if they're doing the long form thing. I think with those tax changes we saw a couple of years ago, that's not as easy to do anymore. So, I'm not even sure employees can actually take it off for themselves.
Okay. Can employers require employees to live in the state of California in order to work for them?
You could. I mean, you'd want to back it up with a reason, so it just says, doesn't look like you're just being, like, oh, here's what we're doing. I think, and it comes back to the approval and the eligibility state, to where, to me, nobody goes out as a remote worker that hasn't gotten your approval. And so you just make sure that your approval is for somewhere in the state of California. If they say, oh, I want to move to New York, to work remotely, you can say, I'm sorry, that doesn't work for us.
Okay.
And that's it.
Okay. Can we state in a policy that employees cannot work from their couch or kitchen table?
You can say it. How are you going to enforce it?
In some cases, in an apartment, where there's 2 people and 3 kids, there might only be a kitchen table.
I know, but that also probably means that They're not, that's where it comes back to those eligibility rules. Do they have a place that's free from distraction and secure, depending on what they're doing? It's like maybe, they've got, where you've given them a little folding table, shall we say, that they can put up, that they can put their laptop on to work. Is that really what you want for a long-term remote worker?
Mhm.
Probably not.
Okay. If an employee accepted a work from home job before COVID, do the employers now need to give them all of the additional equipment that you listed, even if it wasn't part of the original agreement?
No, it's like I provide that. I mean, I've got, like you saw, a pretty long list of things, and when I'm updating somebody's handbook or talking with them about remote, I'll show all those items, but I leave it up to the company to decide. I've got some clients that it's like they're pretty much phone and computer, and they assume the employee has everything else, but just recognize that anything that the employee needs to do the job that you don't provide, they've got a reason. Depends on where they live. In California, they've got a reason to come after you with a claim.
Okay, so it's 11 o'clock right now. We still have quite a few more questions, maybe like 6 or so. Are you able to stay on, CJ?
Yeah, I can stay on so that we can get that if people want to stick around and listen to any.
And we have recorded this session, so if you do need to exit right now, we totally understand. We thank you for your time, and you can get a copy of this recording later. I will continue with the questions. If an employer provides a stipend for all of the things on your list, is the employer still obligated to buy them additional furniture or supplies?
No, a lot of times the equipment or the reimbursement for personal use of the equipment, stuff like that, or the stipend is kind of a negotiation, and it's like, as a company, you need to know that they've got the equipment they need to do the job. How that happens is up for negotiation. You can say, I'll pay you just $100 a month toward the, for using your stuff, and that's fine. I've got some that pay $50 a month because it's not necessarily a full-time remote position, stuff like that. It is a negotiation. You just want to show that you made the attempt to do something that seemed fair.
Okay. So you made it pretty clear how California feels about zero work. It shouldn't cost the employee anything to work for an employer. For employees that are outside of California that might be requesting an internet reimbursement, are employers obligated to pay? And if so, how much?
Well, California as a state has made it pretty clear what their thoughts are, but also IRS. If you look in IRS has a gazillion pamphlets of one sort or another, but there is one, there are some about the business. And they kind of are pretty clear too that, it should not cost the employee anything to work for you. And so I would say with IRS, it's probably less obvious. They don't know to come looking at you like California might. But, in the end, you're looking at being fair. So I don't think it's so much the obligation as being fair to the employee that you've put at home now, because there's a lot of things that the employee has given up to be at home, and a lot of things they're also gaining. So employees as a rule aren't usually overly greedy with the work at home requirements of what they need, but I think we'll see more of that coming out, because like I said, in the last month was the first time I've heard somebody ask about rent. So they're starting to think about it. The ones that weren't working remotely before, it's like, gosh, if you want me to keep doing this, this is something else. Whereas the people who, like even myself, that have always had a home office, I mean, when I go to move, I have one of the bedrooms designated as my office space, and it doesn't look like a second bedroom. It is an office space. I don't have a bed in here. I've got my cupboards, my files, my computer desk, things like that. But the ones that weren't really planning on having a career as a remote worker aren't set up like that, and they might not be in a position to move into some place that, because it would cost them more to move in a location to give you that office space. So it really is more of a fairness thing. When you look at overall what you're providing, look at how long you expect that person to be out there working remote, and whether or not it makes sense for them to have had things set up already in their home.
Right. A lot of people just don't have a spare bedroom.
Yeah.
So if we are offering our workspace to our employees, our normal workspace, and it's COVID compliant, but employees still choose to work from home. Do all of these rules still apply?
For the most part, yes, except I do find, companies are less willing to provide or even reimburse for the equipment piece of it. I mean, the security and stuff like that should still be of a major concern to your company. The equipment piece is the only thing where I've got clients that will be, let's just say, less generous when the employee is requested to work from home. But again, it goes back to your policy. Decide, if it's you requiring them to work from home or you allowing them to work from home. There may be different parts of the policy that will apply, but most of it's going to still apply except for that equipment, section.
Okay. Can you clarify what company protocol for turning on the video should be?
For turning on the video, I think, when I don't quite know. It's like, are you talking about using, the webcam to do the video stuff? I think some of that is, if you've got meetings and stuff like that and you've got everybody set up with it, then you ask them to, be live on there because you want to see their face. There might be an occasional time when they're not prepared to be seen on camera, shall we say. And some people are nervous about it, but I think it's, if you're doing company meetings or team meetings and you're wanting to do it with the camera, I would push having them on live with the camera simply because it helps promote that spirit. It's, because if they don't turn on their camera, then all you're looking at is their name on a little box that lights up when they talk and you're not seeing the person. And part of the whole idea of the meetings with the camera is to keep that personal connection going. It's like having that face-to-face with someone versus just a phone call.
Okay. Some of these questions you've answered as we've talked here. What can we ask for to prove that our employees have childcare?
There's nothing you can ask for. I think you just make it clear in the policy, have them sign off on something, when you're allowing the remote work, kind of like, do something where you've got like line items and they're initialing each one. And, and just make it clear your expectations. So the first time a manager is talking to that employee and they hear kids in the background, ask, why am I hearing kids? I thought you had a quiet and uninterrupted workspace. Now they might say, oh, the nanny's taking care of me in the other room, but the kids are loud. It's like, okay, fine. It's, it's only when you see it becoming a problem where you actually know that they're like in that workspace or something like that, that you have to kind of figure out what you're going to do about it. Okay. But you can't, it's not like you can force them to send you something proving it. I mean, I guess trying to think, I'm not sure that there's any rule that says you couldn't say, I need to see your agreement with the school or with the child care provider or the babysitter. But most of them, like if it's a babysitter or a family member taking care of them, they don't have anything in writing. So what are you going to ask for?
Okay. When we compensate employees for rent or workspace or internet bills or anything else, is that taxable to the employee?
Oh, okay. Most of it's considered a reimbursement, which is non-taxable. I would say no, it's not. It's like paying somebody an expense check. And the rent space, it's like, again, you're giving it to them tax-free because it's a reimbursement for them paying their rent and things like that. So usually it's always done as just a reimbursement, not as actual compensation.
Okay. And if a remote worker leaves and you've purchased their furniture and equipment, can you ask for that back?
Oh, absolutely.
Yes.
You make it clear up front, though, that this is company property. So you make sure you've got like a property checklist or something of like, here's what I've given this employee as property. And even above their signature, it's like, I understand, if our employment relationship should terminate, that the company will arrange for all of this stuff to be picked up.
All right. A lot of people are requesting your policy that you had mentioned on remote workforces. Is that something that you make available to the attendees today, or is that something that they can contact you directly for?
I haven't been because I actually charge my clients for it.
Right. I would say that if you'd like a copy of that policy, you can contact CJ and she can negotiate that with you. One clarification that somebody brought up about the split shift, she says that the DIR states that if it's the employee that chooses to split the shift, then the employer is not liable for split shift pay. Does that sound?
That's true. But then,
Okay.
it's like what you have to look as in the behind the scenes, because it's the same as like working through, like in California, working through your meal break and the manager knows and allows it, then they consider that you're approving them not taking their meal break. I can see in the way California courts work that they could say, well, they knew this was happening and therefore they should have, paid me that split shift pay.
Okay.
So it's like California is very weird in that way that like, if you know it's happening, they're going to assume there's approval for it. And it's like things get twisted up in the California courts. That's all I can say.
Yep. And just to clarify, that when the employer is reimbursing someone for their rent on their space, it's because the employer is renting that space. It doesn't mean it does not apply to homeowners.
No, it's like, it's the space wherever it may be.
Right.
And I would say, it's like, I don't have any claims offering the rent up front.
Right.
It's like you kind of wait until it comes up thought process, because it's never been a thought process in the past. It's just now coming to people who didn't previously always have a remote workspace. So I don't know that you actually get the request, but I might on that one wait for the request on that and then decide how you want to calculate it. Because even for me to write off my workspace, I mean, I've got to measure out like how much is definitely, just workspace compared to how big is my, overall home, and what percentage and even the utilities and things like that go toward my workspace. So it's not an easy, it's not just a simple calculation, oh, we'll pay you 5%. So I don't think I would volunteer it up front. Wait and see if somebody thinks about it. But if that's the case, you might then consider, it's like, how badly do you want them to work from home versus being in your facility if you've got your facility there anyhow.
And other than this training that we did today, are there any other trainings that you can recommend to our audience that might be available for managers that still have questions along these lines?
Well, I'm seeing, I think you just kind of want to do an online search. I'm not familiar with anybody who's like specializing in the remote work kind of thing, because it kind of comes up, all the points. I mean, the things I've added onto this, webinar and talked about all these different topics have come up over time,
Right.
to where it's like, oh, and I guess I'm fortunate that I've got like a lot of clients that have different scenarios for these things. So these are things that have popped up in different clients, at different times that made me think through it and realize that, wow. And because it's funny, I've taken my policy and I put it in a handbook and somebody's like, oh, wow, it's so big. Let me look at it and I'll cut it down. And in the end, they're going, after I look at it, I really don't see anything. I don't want to be part of this policy, because all of these are valid considerations. And it does take management, and even like your IT or whoever's doing your security stuff to help you understand. Because I've had a lot of, clients over the years that have had a lot of remote stuff, or where they've got a contract with some company that they're going to do work for, and suddenly that company's sending back these big questionnaires about your security and things like that. So it's one of those things that's come up over time. I think you'll start seeing more webinars or things. There's a lot of law offices that are just putting out little articles about remote work or things that are coming up in court. So I'd say maybe just kind of, occasionally do an internet search for, remote work, kind of change the words around, a little bit. And because sometimes it's called remote workers, sometimes it's telecommuting, and, see what's out there. Because even for managing remote workers, I think there's been a lot of stuff in the past about what managers need to do differently for those remote workers. So I don't think it'd be that hard to come across just some things or some ideas and articles and things like that to give some thought as to what might work best for your organization.
Okay. And are there, just this is a big picture question. There seems to be or there should be some big conversations happening in the HR world. Do you know of any that are happening that would help make better policies that make remote working viable in the long run, not just for COVID, but this is a trend that is probably going to continue for a long time. Are there best practices discussions coming together in the big picture?
I've not seen a lot, but there are some. It's like there's some of the SHRM, it's Society for Human Resources Management, but if it's just SHRM dot, I think it's org maybe, org.com. But you can look on their site. Sometimes they'll let some of their articles be viewed by non-members. And again, some of the law firms, but I think in the HR side, SHRM, will sometimes have some policies. I don't think I've seen any quite as in depth or covering each of these pieces, because like I said, this PowerPoint, when you get a copy of it, each of those slides is a piece of the policy that I use. And so if you kind of just take those topics and, start looking for some of that, I think it will be helpful. There will be, because there inevitably is in the HR world, because I'd say look towards some of the HR associations, because the different associations often put out different webinars that even non-members can attend, if you pay, and they're often free for the members. And it doesn't even need to be a local one. Some of the national ones, things like that, I think you'll start seeing any of the conversations that are out there and, kind of see what people are coming across. But also, you can start small with your policy, kind of look at what you've, take the topics I've brought up here and like, which are you already seeing some issues with this past year? And, and to kind of start digging and making them a little bit deeper. Like I said, a year ago, my policy was 3 paragraphs.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it's longer. And so it's, like every policy you put in your handbook, it's like it evolves based on what issues you find out in your company.
Yeah.
Or, because the employees are usually going to be the ones that bring up the questions that make you need to have a policy.
Okay. Well, that's the end of our questions, CJ. And to all of our attendees, thank you for attending today's webinar presented by Heffernan. We will send information by email with instructions on how to access a copy of the presentation on our website. And thank you very much, CJ Westrick, for your time and expertise today.
Well, thank you, Deb, and thank you for everybody for sticking around to the very end.
Absolutely. We hope all of the attendees found today's webinar to be a valuable use of your time, and be sure to join us on January 19th for Attracting and Retaining Talent. Thank you and have a very safe day.